Welcome to the second video on code generators. This month, we are going to talk about customizing routes and controllers in order to add new functionality to VuFind. VuFind is built using the model view controller model, which essentially means that the software is divided into a few distinct portions, which allows for separation of concerns and can make it easier to customize. So there are the views, which are for displaying data. That's our theme system. There are the controllers, which are the pieces of code that contain the business logic of VuFind that actually make things happen. And then there are the models, which represent the data within the system. And there are, of course, some sort of services that help bring all of this together. But the important point is the controllers are what make things happen. The views are what display things to the user. And today we're going to make some new things happen and display some new things to users. And we're going to use code generators to make the job easier. Another concept that's important for understanding all of this is the router. So VuFind uses Lamenas's router for mapping URLs to controllers. So whenever you access a URL under VuFind's control, the router picks apart the pieces of that URL and uses them to decide which controller code to run. And that's really how everything happens in VuFind. Routes are defined through configuration, which can be put anywhere in the framework's configuration stack. But currently, most of VuFind's routes are found inside the VuFind code module. And I'm just going to show you in the code under module VuFind config in module.config.php. At the very top of the configuration, there's this router routes section. And this contains a number of predefined routes. You can override these or add to them in your own local module if you need to, and we'll get to that a little later. But I just wanted to show you as a useful example, the default route, which is what VuFind will use to match URLs if it finds no more specific route later in the configuration. This is using a segment routing method, which is what allows us to define the route with these little named placeholders. Brackets indicate optional portions. So what this is saying is that if you have a URL that starts with a slash and then optionally has some more text, and maybe optionally has another slash and some even more text, that first chunk of text between slashes is going to be used as a controller variable, and that second part is going to be used as an action. We have some constraints on these parameters, so the route will only match if we have alphanumeric or underscores or dashes in the values. And we also have some defaults. So if one of these sections is omitted, it'll use a default instead. So what this is showing us is that when you go to VuFind's base URL, you go to the home action of the index controller. But if you put names into the URL, you override these defaults and you affect which controller and which action get executed. So for today, I'm going to create a new controller called tutorial and put some functionality into that. So based on this route, you can see that if I were to just add /tutorial to a VuFind URL, what's going to happen is action is going to default to home because I omitted it, and controller is going to get overridden with tutorial. So let's just try that and see what happens. Not surprisingly, I get an error message telling me controller is not found. This is to be expected because we don't have a tutorial controller yet. I should also note that I'm seeing this detailed error message because I've turned on development mode in VuFind. If I had not turned on development mode, I would see a generic message that would be far less informative. It's always a good idea to have development mode on while you're developing because it helps with troubleshooting like this. That all being said, let's go ahead and make ourselves a tutorial controller so that we can start attaching some behavior to this URL. I'm going to assume that you already have a local module called tutorial and that you're somewhat familiar with the plugin code generator because we talked about both of those things last month. So I'm going to go to my VuFind home directory and I am going to run the plugin generator to build myself a new controller inside my tutorial module. So I do this by saying php public index.php generate plugin, and I'm going to call my controller tutorial / controller / tutorial controller. So the first part of the namespace will tell the plugin generator to generate code in the tutorial module. The fact that the second part says controller will tell it that we're building a controller, and then it will create a tutorial controller class. One important feature of the plugin generator that I'm going to take advantage of here is that the last parameter you can specify is the name of an existing factory for building your new class. If I were to omit this parameter, it would just create a new empty factory that I could fill in. But because all of VuFind's controllers extend an abstract base class that provides some helpful functionality and requires some specific constructor parameters, I'm going to use VuFind's existing default controller factory, which is named VuFind / controller / abstract base factory. So this will tell the generator to reuse that existing factory to build my new class instead of building a new empty factory that I would have to fill in. And also a reminder that I have to double up all of these backslashes because of the quirks of the command line. But what I'm actually generating are class names with single backslashes in them, as one would expect. So there we go. I have just created a tutorial controller and configured it in my local module. So now if I go back over here and I refresh this page, I have a new error message. It now says error controller cannot dispatch. This is because I created a controller and VuFind was able to find it, but I haven't defined the home action that the route is trying to execute. So my next task is to define a home action. So I'm going to go over to my editor and go into my tutorial module where I will see that the code generator has created this controller folder under my source code and built an empty tutorial controller. So in Labanos MVC, the framework that we're using, controllers are organized as a class containing methods whose names end with action. So because we want to route to a home action, I need to create a public function called home action and put something into it. As I mentioned, we're using a model view controller system where the views are separated from the controllers. And the way that these two pieces of the system communicate with each other is that every action returns what's called a view model, which is just a container full of values that the view will have access to. To get started with, we don't need to send any values at all. We're just going to go with the default template render to begin. So we can return an empty view model with no special data. And as I mentioned, VuFind controllers generally extend this abstract base class, which includes a helper function called create view model, which will give you an empty view model automatically with some useful values pre-populated. So I'm just going to start out here with this simple public function home action that simply returns this create view model with no parameters. So I've now defined an action that returns the right kind of value. So let's refresh this page and see what our next error message is. All right, we've got a new error message. We were now able to find a controller and dispatch an action, but now the framework is trying to render the template associated with our action, which by naming convention is going to be tutorial for the controller / home for the action. But we've created no such template yet, so VuFind couldn't find it, so it created yet another error. So let's go build a template in our theme so that we can resolve this latest problem. So if I go to my tutorial theme and my templates directory, I just need to create a folder in here called tutorial to match my controller. And then I want to create a file in here called home.phtml to match the name of my action. And the phtml extension just represents a PHP HTML template. And for now, all I'm going to put in here is hello world. So now all of my pieces are in place. I have created a controller and a route and a template. So if I refresh the page, hello world, I have a message displayed. So this is how you create a new action. But displaying a piece of text is not that exciting. Why don't we look into how we can actually interact with this a little bit? So suppose rather than saying hello world, I wanted to be able to specify my name as a parameter on the command line. So I could add !, name equals Damien. And then I would like this to say hello Damien instead of hello world. The framework makes this quite easy to achieve. First, I need to go up to my tutorial controller and add some logic. So every controller in the framework has access to a helper called params, which you can access by calling this params with parentheses. And the params helper has various methods on it you can use for extracting values from the incoming request. There is a from query method where you can specify the name of a parameter and also a default value. So if I say name equals this params from query name comma world, that means it will set the name variable equal to the value of the name parameter in the query. And if that is undefined, it'll just use world instead. So I also mentioned, of course, that view models are used for passing values to the view. And this create view model helper function that you have access to in VuFind's controllers lets you specify an array of values to pass. So I'm just going to create an array that includes this name value I've just pulled out of the request and passes it through as name. Having done this, I will now have access to a name variable in my template. So I can replace the word world here with a PHP echo tag that displays this escape HTML name. Note that it's always important to remember to HTML escape values that you display to prevent injection attacks or simply garbled displays. So now just by pulling a value from the query in the controller, passing it to the view, displaying it in the view, I have some interaction in place. And sure enough, when I refresh the page, it says hello Damien. And if I take my get parameter back off again, the default kicks in and I still get hello world. Since we've made some nice progress here, I'm just going to take a moment and do a git commit to save all of this progress. And so that when I do some subsequent work, I can more easily show you what has changed since this initial baseline was set. So it's nice to be able to specify get parameters, but suppose you want to actually seamlessly integrate a value into the URL itself. So say, for example, we want to be able to go to tutorial/home/custom location and have the display tell us that we have entered custom location. If I do this right now, I get a no route match instance provided because I've created this 3-part route with multiple /separated values, and there is no route configuration in VuFind that knows what to do with this. The default route expects only 2 pieces, and we've just provided 3. So if we want this kind of a route to work, we need to generate a custom route. Fortunately, we have a command line generator tool that will do exactly that. So if I go back to the command line where I'm in the VuFind home directory, I can run php public index.php generate dynamic route. And then I need to specify the name of this route, which I'm going to call tutorial-home. The route name is important both because it's used as the key in the configuration array so that you can potentially override it by name in a later part of the configuration process. It's also important because in templates, you can use the URL view helper to convert a route name into an actual working URL, which is a great way to abstract your URLs and make it possible to override and customize them. Anyway, I've named my route tutorial home here. Then I need to say which module, or rather, I need to say which controller I'm using, the tutorial controller. And then I need to provide the remainder of the route that I want to match. So I'm going to say home/:location. This is using the router's segment syntax where you can put any name beginning with a colon to use as a placeholder that will be passed through to your controller as a route parameter. So the idea here is that we want to allow a location name to be appended after the home part of the URL. Finally, I say tutorial for the name of the module where I want this configuration to be added. So when I hit enter here, it automatically makes some changes to my tutorials module.config.php. I should also note that dynamic route is just one of several route generating tools that VuFind includes. You can also create static routes for simple pages that don't take segment parameters. And you can create record routes for linking to things that act like VuFind standard record view. You can find more details on all of this on the generator page of the wiki. But for now, let's just take a look using git diff at what the generator just did for us. And as you can see, it created a route named tutorial home like I asked it to. It's a segment route because I used the appropriate generator to create segment routes. And the full route is /tutorial/home/location placeholder. It got the tutorial part from the controller name I provided and the rest from the action I specified. And then it has defaults of tutorial controller and home action because we want those values to be hard coded in because we don't have controller or action segments in the route match. So let's see what that did for us. If I go back over here and refresh the page, sure enough, I no longer have an error because there's now a valid route that understands what to do with tutorial/home/custom location. But I just have my default hello world message because I haven't done anything with that route parameter yet. Thus, I need to go back to my code again and back to my controller. And as I mentioned, the controller's params helper can get values from a variety of places, and from the route is one of those places. So I can say location equals this params from route, specify location, which matches that segment name in the route configuration we just looked at. And just as with query parameters, I can also provide a default value should that be omitted. So I'll just say default location here. And I need to pass that location value along to the view through the view model. So I'm also going to add down here a location key to point to the location variable. Save that, go over to my template, and now I can just say you are in, and again, use a PHP echo tag to display an escaped version of the location that comes through from the route. Now, if I go back and refresh again, hello world, you are in custom location. I can add my name to this, and it will say, hello Damien, you are in custom location. Pretty neat. So these are two different ways you can provide values from the URL and communicate them to your controller. And this explains how a lot of the URLs in VuFind actually work. So let's just do one more thing. What if we wanted to have a less complicated URL? We don't like this home portion. So we'd like to just be able to say tutorial/custom location. Right now, if I do that, of course, I get cannot dispatch because there's no such thing in my controller as a custom location action. But we can take advantage of the router to just change the way the tutorial controller behaves and make this a little simpler to build our URLs. All I need to do is go into my tutorial module and edit the configuration there. So let's find my route down here. So right now, this route is very specific. It has to have /tutorial/home/ in it, or it won't match. And it also has to have some kind of a location placeholder. But let's make more things optional. So first of all, we don't want to say home anymore. That's not interesting to us. Next, let's make the location value optional so that if you leave it off, you can have a default. Let's also make this trailing / optional. We'll wrap another pair of brackets around. So now, if you go to tutorial by itself, you're going to get the home action. If you go to tutorial/something, you're still going to get the home action because it's set down here as the default. But what we need to do now is add a default value for this location placeholder so that something gets passed through if it is omitted. I'm going to say default route location because this will be useful for demonstrating something helpful. The other thing that we might consider doing is adding a constraint for our location placeholder. These default controller and action placeholders are actually meaningless in this context because these values can't be passed in, but they're included in all of VuFind's routes just as sort of a safety mechanism and example. But Since location is something that users can provide input to, we might want to control what characters they're allowed to pass through in that position to protect against attacks or unexpected behavior. So I'm just going to put the same constraint on location that is used for controller in action to require it to start with a letter and then follow that with a sequence of letters, numbers, and separators. So with all of this saved, if I go back into the browser and refresh my page, now I'm at my shorter version of the URL, and it's working again because the router matched this pattern and took us to the home action and passed through all of the values. The other thing I wanted to show you is that if I leave off this location placeholder, it now says I'm in default route location. That is because I specified a default value for location in the route. And even though my controller, when it reads the location from the route, uses this default location value if the placeholder is missing, the router default is going to get applied first, and that's going to take precedence over the default in my controller. So that's all I wanted to show you today. You should now know how to build routes and how to build controllers, and also perhaps understand a little bit better about how user input from the browser flows through into VuFind's internals and how data gets displayed. If you don't want to build a whole new controller, there are also other generators you could consider using, such as the extend class generator that you can use to override an existing controller in your custom module. So you could override just one method, or you could add a method to an existing controller. You can also, as I mentioned, use route names to override specific routes in your local module. If, for example, you wanted to change the text that displays in the URL for certain kinds of functionality. These are all things I'd be happy to demonstrate on a future video if there's interest. So let me know. In any case, thanks again for your attention, and I hope this has been helpful.